We're live.
All right.
So, hi Martin, thanks for joining me. For anybody watching, you may know me by now. I'm Rena, the teacher training manager at the Shala. And I have with me here Martin, who's going to speak to us about our upcoming meditation teacher training. I'll just give a few details actually about when that's happening. So we've got a 4-day immersion happening 2 weekends, 16th and 17th of October and 13th and 14th of November. And it's a 30-hour certificate. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Rena.
Yeah, you too. Shall I dive into my first question?
Please, go ahead. Sure.
You've got a lot of experience meditating yourself, your own meditation practice, but also quite a lot of experience now with teaching meditation to yoga teachers and people that want to be meditation teachers and mindfulness teachers. And in this training that you're doing with the Shala, you explored different types of meditation. And I just wondered, I was thinking and reflecting on this, that when I meditate, certain meditations are right for me at certain times, but that's not necessarily the case for students as well. So I guess my question to you is how do students determine what resonates with them and when in terms of meditation practice? And how do you, as then a meditation teacher, know what may resonate and fit your students?
Yeah. Okay. So like you say, there's a wide variety of approaches to meditation. And particularly, right, there's a wide variety of techniques. But for me, technique, you can't really reduce meditation to technique. So while we'll explore different techniques in the training, I think it's much more helpful to see meditation as a process, right? That different techniques might feed into. So if you're defining your practice by a technique, then there's a lot of, oh, this one or that one, and then you can get confused by that. If you're defining your practice more as a process of what, right? Oh, a process of deepening capacity, basically, to be where you are, a deepening capacity to have your attention settle into your experience, right, rather than just bouncing around, a deepening capacity to recognize where there's tension patterns, defenses, unhelpful beliefs, etc., etc. Then you can use different techniques to feed that deepening process without getting too confused. So, we'll get into different approaches and ways of meditating, but that's the most helpful feature. We'll be supporting what we could call a single process of deepening practice fed by different aspects of technique.
Yeah, and I'm guessing as well that the more you practice yourself, the more fluid taking these different processes or areas can come in terms of what is right at that very present moment in time, or what is helpful for you at that moment in time.
Yeah, well, the more you integrate the fruits of meditation practice yourself, just the more clear your discernment is for how to direct other people, right? I think of it as 3 kind of layers of teaching. The first one is you're just transmitting information. So I can read it here and then I can tell you about it, right? Yeah. And anybody can do that level of teaching. Then the second layer is when I'm teaching something that I have actually known in my own direct experience, right? And, already yoga teachers will know it's really important that you're teaching at least from that second level, that you're not passing on just theoretical information, you're passing on something that you've entered into and metabolized in your own experience. Yeah. And then the third layer of teaching is when you're not just teaching something that you have known at some point, but you're teaching something that's alive in you right now in the moment of teaching it. So you're talking about presence and embodiment and awareness, and you're speaking out of that connection that you kind of, and so there's a sort of spectrum of presence that's available to you, and that's what one's communicating out of. And that'll be one of the foundations, right, of guiding people through the 4 days of training, really establishing that kind of bedrock of presence oneself.
Yeah. I mean, when you were talking about, the different techniques, and if we get stuck on that, a word that popped out to me a lot was rigidity, and that to me is very different to creativity.
Right.
It's almost the opposite of creativity. And when you're so stuck in rigidity, then you almost can't be present, I think, and just sit with what is happening there. And I'm a trainee psychotherapist. And so what we do in the therapy room is you take all of these different tools and you learn about them, but you don't apply that theory in the room. It sits inside of you and you do your own therapy and your own work and your own practice. And then it feels to me like a magic and an intuition comes when you are practicing presence. And it's like you can very quickly react or very quickly tune in. It sounds very similar to that process.
Yeah, because what you're training, whether in your own practice or in the supporting someone else, is you're training responsiveness, right? Which is kind of the opposite to rigidity. Rigidity, it's got to be like this, and this is the right technique. Right? Responsiveness is, just says, oh, what's alive in body and mind right now? What's mind doing? Where am I caught? Where is there some tension? What's needed? And so that allows you to be responsive in a way that technique is great to know some techniques, but the techniques are secondary. The techniques are serving the responsiveness in the moment, whether that's responding to what's happening here in oneself, or whether it's the responsiveness of guiding somebody else in somewhere they're stuck or something they're trying to look into. Yeah,
and I can imagine as well, because on a lot of our trainings, our teachers say similar things, that these are the techniques, these are the skills that will be imparted on you. But what we're trying to encourage in teachers is for you to be able to almost use these skills and techniques as part of your toolkit, as part of your tool belt, and create your own authentic way of teaching with your voice and with you tuning in. And what that's always made me think about is how alive that can make teachers feel, because it's so creative, and it's so personal, and authenticity then is, I think, really important there.
Yeah. And I think there's a wise line there, right, with not trying to be too creative too quickly. There's a reason why things have been taught in a certain way, and a reason why things are passed on in a certain way. And so on the one hand, it's helpful to have one foot in a tradition, and so you can actually benefit from the experience of countless generations who've been practicing before you. And, so I remember one of my teacher's advice was, teach exactly as you were taught for 5 years and then do whatever you like. And that's, it's like, really and it's not about the 5-year thing, but that sense of actually really living your way into why things are practiced a certain way and how to impart them in a certain way until you know it really deeply and well enough inside that you can give rise to your own creativity and flexibility and responsiveness without too veering off too much on your own path. That might be creative, but it might also be a bit kind of off.
It's grounded creativity, isn't it? It's like having your feet on the floor but your arms reaching for the stars, I think.
Right.
And that's a really helpful, interesting point around that line between going off and also us making the most of the lineage and the thoughts and perceptions and knowledge gained from people going back thousands and thousands of years, essentially, when it comes to meditation. Okay, this brings me on to it doesn't segue nicely into my next question, but it brings me on to my next question, which is just a lot of our students want to know what the training is about and how it's going to be taught and what they're going to learn. And this training's experiential, but also students will come away with skills. So how do they both intertwine in the training, and what kind of skills will the students come out with?
Yeah, so partly there'll be an orientation to deepening one's own practice as the foundation, right? Like we were saying earlier about those 3 levels of teaching. You don't get to teach something really just by learning about it. You get to teach something by integrating and understanding it. So on each of the 4 days, we'll cover a kind of 4 classical areas of meditation, exploring bodily life and the feeling life and mental cognitive life, and then just the nature of experience. And the progression through that, integrating it in one's own practice. We'll do some practice teaching so that they were in groups. People will get together with others on the training and explore like the way of languaging and expressing that. And then we'll have time between us to check in, like what arises out of that, how do people experience it, and for me to point to some of the pitfalls or places, maybe as teachers, but particularly as the students they're teaching, the classic places that people get into some kind of knot of difficulty or of misunderstanding or whatever, and how to address that skillfully. Yeah.
That sounds really helpful. It sounds like there's the looking at your own meditation and your own practice, and then how that will affect the student. And I think it's really important, and this does nicely segue into my next question as well. I think it's really important to understand some of the pitfalls of how this could land in your students as well. I did a meditation training a few years ago, and it wasn't very trauma informed. Since I've learned a little bit more about being trauma informed, and this course is trauma informed. And these words, trauma informed, are coming up a lot in yoga. And, I was doing a sort of module on a course the other day, and it was talking about being careful about students actually tuning in, because sometimes our inner universes don't feel that safe at various different times. So can you talk to me a little bit more about why being a trauma-informed meditation teacher is so important, and how you think, why you think this is so important right now when a lot of people are talking about being a trauma-informed teacher?
Yeah. Well, I think in the first 20, 30, 40 years maybe of kind of Eastern contemplative practices taking root in Europe, let's say, there was a lot of excitement about, wow, these practices are potent and transformative, but there wasn't a lot of understanding about the ways people could get into trouble with them. So, of course, by trauma, we mean some difficult, painful event from the past that somebody at the time wasn't able to fully understand, digest, metabolize, and that therefore they've got some kind of largely unconscious, probably defensive layer built around that painful wound. And so when you start tuning into experience, it can be overwhelming, right? To come in contact with something that one's basically buried under layers of defense. Or there can just be the tendency to kind of bounce off it rather violently, almost. So it's not that in teaching meditation, you're supposed to be able to manage all of that stuff, but it's important to be able to see where it might not be helpful for someone. Sometimes we talk about meditation, just be with it, whatever it is, just be with it, just be with it. It's good instruction, but it's not complete enough. And sometimes you don't want to just try and keep on being with something. If something feels too frightening, too overwhelming, right, too agitating, it's not skillful, right? That's what too much means. Too much means I can't be with this. So if something feels just agitating or just painful, we can cultivate a lot of capacity to sense in, to be gentle, to be accommodating, to be spacious. But if it feels too much, actually, it's important that somebody teaching can recognize that too much and give people other skillful means other than just being with, like consciously directing one's attention to a source of something that feels okay. A lot of difficult emotional material, for instance, is held throat, chest, diaphragm, belly. And so sometimes it's totally appropriate and important to direct your attention away from that if it's too much. For example, just into the feeling of your hands or your legs or your bum on the ground. It's like, oh yeah, where you can recover a sense of stability, of ease, of okayness.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. And I think we do have to be really mindful as well as teachers of of how people's defenses actually do protect them a little bit as well, and going slow in your practice as well. Maybe something's a bit agitated, maybe you're scratching the surface a little bit, but just to make things inclusive, essentially, that people that are coming from different spaces and different levels of trauma or different levels of agitation, because it's different every day. That's the thing as well. Like sometimes you may be very aware of your agitation or traumas, and some days it may not be as well. So there's quite a lot of skill in actually being able to navigate that space safely and inclusively.
There's a lot of, so I've been practicing for 30 years. I've been teaching for 20 years. I've been training other teachers for 10 years now. And it's like, oh, there's infinite depth and nuance to how to practice, to how to teach, etc. But before that appears too kind of limitless and daunting to people, if you're teaching people some basic meditative skills and approaches within the context of yoga teaching, it's not like you necessarily having to address all this vast field of material, right? You're not going to learn all of that in a 4-day training, but you can learn how to faithfully represent meditative practice and be of some support. And a lot of people, particularly yoga practitioners, a lot of them have got a few unhelpful ideas about how to meditate. Because a lot of people have gone to a yoga class, they've done their asana, and then at the end of the class, they've done some kind of vaguely held 5 minutes of meditation where they've gotten some idea that they're supposed to just empty their mind or something. And I find a lot of yoga practitioners come to meditation practice with that. That's their main obstacle. They think that they're supposed to empty their mind, and they think they're not very good at meditation, because they haven't been able to manage to empty their mind. And actually, it's more like they just haven't had very good instruction often.
Yeah.
And so it's not great complex stuff to be able to be just of basic helpful support in introducing people, supporting people, and guiding people in a few foundational ways of meditating.
Yeah, that really resonates with me as well. I have had so many students say, not necessarily at the Charlotte, but just generally in life, say, I can't meditate, I can't do it, I can't empty my mind, things come in. And actually you realize that when you've set up that as a goal, and then the instruction isn't right, or the instructor also thinks the same as well, it's just another touch point in life where you feel like you failed, that you don't feel good about yourself, really. So I can see why just some sort of turning certain things on their head, looking at some myths and so on, would also be very helpful, but not daunting that this is something ridiculously complex that you have to do a PhD on, but just, being really mindful of what the goals are and what your idea of goals are, and some of the beliefs that people could have picked up, yoga teachers as well, about what meditation and mindfulness is.
Yeah, you want to be basically, if we want to be really simple, the training is in how to well support people, how to not mislead people, how to not misrepresent meditation practices. That's pretty good already. That's pretty good, because then most of what you're doing beyond that is you're kind of entrusting students with enough background that they can discover for themselves. And anybody who's watching this who's gotten any real benefit out of meditation, you'll notice the real benefit you've got isn't what you've been told. It's been the way you've learned to meet and explore and understand and be freer around your own experience. So then the teaching, in a way, it's like you're learning how to put people in that sweet spot where they get to find out how to meet themselves, explore themselves, understand themselves, and get freer around some of their own mental and emotional loops and their own physical or energetic tension patterns.
And so language is something that we'll be looking at on the course as well, and that's another thing, as well as being trauma informed and inclusive. Language, the language that teachers use is really coming up as something to be mindful around. Can you just tell me a little bit on, you don't have to delve everything, but can you tell me a little bit about what the role of language will play on the course?
Yeah. Well, on the one hand, I think it's important to use a sort of ordinary language as much as possible. Sometimes, again, people will know from the yoga context, sometimes it's really appropriate to refer back to the Sanskrit term. It's appropriate when you're exploring something in the etymology of the Sanskrit term that helps to illuminate what you're teaching about or learning about. But you'd also find sometimes people kind of hiding behind Sanskrit terms just because they sound kind of exotic, like the way people use the word namaste, for example, in all kinds of weird, it just means hello.
I know.
Don't believe what anybody tells people about all the cosmic meanings. Namaste means hello.
And actually, when you talk about namaste as well, I was in a class the other day, and I come from an Indian family, and so we'd go to an event or a wedding, namaste, 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 namaste to everybody. Yeah. And now I'm in yoga world and I've been here for a few years. It really triggers me when somebody says namaste at the end. It almost takes me out of a shavasana, and it kind of takes me a bit back to feeling a bit agitated, and it runs so deep, these things. And I know there's good intentions, but I'm looking at myself thinking, gosh, you know, I can be quite calm. I'm so agitated by this that one word has done this to me.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, I need to look at myself and
no. You don't. People need to leave namaste at the door. You know, really. Anyway, the point being, so is it? Sometimes there's real worth in understanding. There's something important about the etymology of an ancient term or Pali or Sanskrit language. But it can easily also just seem like mumbo jumbo, or it can seem foreign to people or unnecessarily exotic. And if you really will be trying to use a language that's ordinary and secular, but also a language that's precise. So, for example, people talk about consciousness, awareness, attention, presence, mindfulness, often in a whole hodgepodge. And it's important, if you're using these words and you're trying to direct people to work with their minds, what do you mean when you say consciousness? And what's distinct from that where you say awareness or when you say mindfulness? So we'll give some careful attention to the way we use language, because it's important actually in being able to be clear and appropriate in how you direct people. And that refers to both, you know, the incorporation or not of ancient terminology and language, and the precision around contemporary language.
And would you say that, because for me, language and inclusivity are really related as well, that sometimes when we're being overcomplicated, or like you say, hiding behind certain terms, it can get very confusing for the student, and we don't want to do that. You know, we want to make sure they because it's not about us necessarily. We're serving our students, you know. So we want to make sure that things are understandable and they get it, really. And so for me, there's something about making sure that your language is very inclusive. And doesn't create another touch point like, I can't empty my mind, oh, I failed again, I don't understand this, I'm not a yogi, I can't get it.
Yeah. So some language is helpful around that, and also just addressing that kind of mechanism of doubt and, you know, the inner critic structure, right? The people's tendency to undermine their own confidence, the fact that they sit down to meditate and then their mind goes everywhere. And then, well, there's two conclusions you could draw from that. The first conclusion is, oh, well, that's clearly I can't meditate. I've got a terrible mind. It wanders everywhere, right? Which is just, you know, it's a way of undermining one's confidence. The other conclusion you could draw, which is much more helpful, is, wow, that's the nature of mind. I mean, if somebody who sits down like that, that's their first great insight. Your mind isn't under your control, you know. Mind has a mind of its own. Mind, by its nature, moves. It generates ideas and images and interpretations. Yeah. And so then based on that, it's like, okay, well, so how can I interact skillfully with the way that mind does this? How can I learn about my habits of mind? And how can I cultivate more helpful habits of mind, etc.?
Yeah.
So we'll really look into that structure of like the inner critic and all its kind of painful, undermining tendencies.
Yeah. I was just going to say to you that when I first started meditating about 13 years ago, my meditation teacher always used to say to me, just imagine that your mind is a child that's just really curious and walking next to a river and sometimes getting a bit too close. So gently take that child's hand and guide it away. And that really sticks in my mind still 14 years later. And when I've done some classes and I've done some meditation, I've always used that, because what it made me do is not be so harsh and critical.
Right.
on
Right.
myself. Just understand that your mind is curious like a lovely little child, you know, that is going to want to go and see the water, but just guide it back. That's what minds do. And there was a real moment of like an aha moment almost. This is just what my mind does, you know.
Right.
And in different times in my life, it will be more scatty, like, you know, the attention will be a bit more fragmented, but it's okay. It's what minds do.
Right. Right. Nice. Yes.
So an important part of the course as well is to learn embodied awareness as well, and to come from an embodied awareness place. Am I using the right language? Yeah, just to learn embodied awareness. It's a part of the training. And we hear about feeling embodied and having embodied awareness a lot. And I realized when I was reading this, actually, that what does that mean? What exactly is embodied awareness? And what benefit does it massively have as well for a teacher or somebody learning to meditate, teaching meditation?
Well, when we hear the term meditation or mindfulness, maybe, people often overly associate that with some kind of mental activity or mental practice. You might call it we're training our mind, or we're working with the mind, etc. Okay, but where is your mind? Now, I know that's a deeper question than one can answer, right? Because nobody ever in history has managed to satisfactorily answer that question. Where's your mind? Where's your mind? But the only place one can have any relationship to the mysterious here-ness of mind is here, right? Mind is embodied. We think somewhat weirdly that our mind lives in our head because we confuse mind with brain. Mind doesn't live in your head. Right? Brain, the organ, is in your head. In the same way we think thoughts happen in your head. Thoughts don't happen in your head. These synapses fire in the brain. Where thoughts happen is much more mysterious. Right? Where thoughts happen is here. Right? Where mind is here. And you can end up thinking, oh, here, where's here? But really, what we call mindfulness is embodied awareness. It's the capacity to inhabit experience in a kind of full spectrum way. And, you know, most people are quite fragmented in their attention. And so we think of my body as a kind of a thing, rather than actually knowing the immediate experience of bodily life from the inside. And actually, often, hopefully, yoga practitioners have a bit of a head start on that with others, because, you know, asana practice and attuning to where you're tense and learning to soften more into a stretch of something, it attunes you more generally to bodily life. But sometimes what can happen is it only attunes you in the intensity of the stretch or the movement or the stronger sensation. And so then in meditation, one's learning how to maintain that attunement when there's less stimulation and just sitting quietly. And what are the benefits or effects of that? The one is just basically learning to live in a way that's way more relaxed. You know, mostly what we know as relaxation for most people isn't really very relaxed. Relaxation is a kind of infinite trajectory. You just relax. So it's kind of muscular relaxation, but then energetic relaxation, emotional relaxation, cognitive relaxation, and that sense of that embodied presence. Its basic flavor is really of ease. So there's a kind of quiet, kind of nourishing quality that increasingly runs through the experience of being alive. So that's the first big benefit. And then because of that relaxation and access, it's like where you get your information from ceases to be so much just your ideas and thoughts about things. You get to learn where from the subtle tension patterns that we create, the subtle defensiveness, the way compulsion builds up, and you get to learn how to kind of soften your desires and defenses and distractions before they get into the complex world of all your ideas, and get to meet them on the way up, as it were, as they're starting to crystallize into energetic forms. So the sense of an embodied ground to meditation will really run through all of the training together.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. When you said about all these layers, and just feeling that relaxation in all of these layers, it almost sounded a bit blissful. And I'm mindful of using that word blissful because I think it can get a little twisted. Like you say, I think we relax, but actually there's so many layers of that. And just imagining how it would feel to feel relaxed on all those layers, I guess for me just sounds so calm and peaceful, but also just expansive as well. Just in a way it feels like that you can feel relaxation but feel really alive as well at the same time, and they seem like opposites, but it feels like that's what exists in this space.
Right. Because most of our cultural associations with relaxation involve going unconscious. Relax in front of the TV. Relax by having a few drinks. Relax when you fall asleep. But they're all ways of going unconscious. So meditation is about how to relax consciously, so that actually the more relaxed you are, the more awake you are, the more clear you are, the more aware you are of what's going on. And so, like you say, even though they sound opposite, that actually meditation is where relaxed presence and clarity of attention really come together.
That's amazing. My mind feels a bit blown at the moment with that, because there's a juxtaposition, but sometimes very sweet things come in the middle of opposites, or what feels opposites, those sort of liminal spaces. Thank you so much. That's all of my questions, but it's been a really interesting chat. Martin, is there anything else that you want to mention?
No, I appreciate the questions you've asked, Rena, and I'm looking forward to the training, and I hope it can be really helpful for people. Like I said, I don't want to be critical of the yoga field when I say that a lot of yoga students have had poor instruction in meditation, but I'm interested in teaching this for the Sala and for you all, because I think yoga students are open to meditation practice, and so it would be a shame if they're not well met in that interest. And I think there's a really good possibility for yoga teachers to be able to bring some skill and responsiveness to being of good service to people in introducing them to meditation practice.
That's exactly how I see it. I'm so excited about the Shala being able to offer this, because I just feel like it could be so helpful for teachers, but also the students that teachers serve. Many people have had very stressful year and a half or so, and we're coming out of something, and lots of people don't like using this word, but I think after this last year and a half or so, some people could do with a little bit of healing, or just looking at their inner universe and making it a nicer place for them to live in. So it just feels like it's a great training that teachers can take to add on to their classes and incorporate meditation. And like you say, honor it faithfully as well. Know that they're creating safety, because that's what we need in the classes. We need safety. Nothing therapeutic happens unless there is some safety there. It's the basics. So it feels like a really lovely training to be able to add tools onto teachers' belts that are really needed with students and even teachers right now, that could be really helpful, supportive, inclusive, and safe.
Nice. All right, Raina. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care. And for anybody watching, I will. This video will be up on Facebook in a few minutes, and I'll put all the details and the link to the course that you can book now in the Facebook page. Thanks so much, Martin.
All right. See you.
Bye.